This is a story of fundamental deceit. The lies that you have been told. Sorry, but your parents may have misled you all along. And you are doing the same to your children. But then, you don't need to blame yourself. Because the society is dancing to a rhythm, following a pattern, but not teaching the realities on ground. Not telling the whole truth. But here, today, in this story, you know the truth that you have already faced with regrets and bitterness. Even if you are still unaware, watch and learn.
The signs were clear. The bright light was obvious. Greatness was in the midst. From the very first day Steve walked into a classroom, it seemed as though destiny had already carved his name into the walls of greatness. He wasn't just another child with curious eyes and restless hands. Steve was different. While other children stumbled over alphabets, he was reading full sentences with ease. While others still struggled with the concept of numbers, he was already adding, subtracting, and asking questions that made teachers pause and wondered. By the time Steve was 8 years old, his neighbors were already observing and foretelling with sayings like, "That boy will go far, he's destined for greatness, and this boy has a bright future." Mothers used his name as a standard of comparison. "Why can't you be like Steve?" some fathers would ask their sons when school reports came home. Steve's brilliance wasn't just a gift to his family, it was a badge of honor for the entire community. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dramani, took every pride in him. They were not poor people. His father worked as a civil engineer, and his mother ran a thriving textile shop. They ensured Steve did not lack anything. He always had brand new book, school uniforms and other necessities, including private tutors for extra lessons, not because he was weak, but because his parents believed sharpening a bright mind was like polishing gold. It made it shine brighter. Steve enjoyed the attention and applause that he got at school assemblies, the admiration in his teachers' eyes, the way his classmates looked at him whenever he raised his hand. It was intoxicating. He grew up believing that intelligence was the ultimate key that unlocks doors in life. His report cards always carried a single word beside his name: excellent. And with every award he collected, with every prize he won, the conviction grew stronger: life would never deny him anything. How could it? He was Steve, the golden boy. In secondary school, this conviction only deepened. He didn't just pass exams, he dominated them. Mathematics, sciences, literature, name the subject, Steve conquered it. He represented his school in competitions, and more often than not, he returned with trophies. His teachers adored him, and his principal boasted about him in educational conferences. "We have a gem in our school," the principal would say proudly. "Mark my words, he will become a leader of tomorrow." And Steve believed it. Every time he stood on stage to collect an award, he envisioned the future, a great career, wealth, influence, and a life people could only dream of. He was certain the world was simply waiting for him to arrive. Yet, in the shadows of his brilliance, other stories were being written, stories he paid little attention to. Kelvin, for example. Kelvin was his classmate, but the two were worlds apart. While Steve sat in the front row, eager and focused, Kelvin lounged at the back, cracking jokes, barely opening his textbooks. Teachers scolded him daily, his grades were pitiful, and the phrase most commonly attached to his name was hopeless. Steve often pitied him, sometimes even mocked him silently. People like Kelvin, he thought, will never get anywhere in life. But Steve was certain that he would. After all, how could someone so brilliant, so celebrated, so carefully groomed for success, not become everything the world promised? His parents had already mapped out the future. His father often said, "Son, once you graduate with the best grades, the world will fight over you. Companies will line up at your door, and opportunities will chase you. You just focus on being number one." And Steve obeyed. Being number one was easy for him anyway. The day Steve received his secondary school leaving certificate, his name once again rang out in the assembly hall as the overall best student. His classmates clapped, his teachers cheered, and his parents cried tears of joy. The principal placed a medal around his neck and said, "Young man, the sky is your starting point. Don't stop until you own the stars." Steve's heart soared. He could almost see it as he fantasized about the offices he would own, the cars he would drive, the applause that would never cease. With his brilliance and his parents' support, failure was not in his dictionary. But life, as he was yet to discover, does not always read the dictionary of a promising child. Sometimes, life has a language of its own. University life only seemed to confirm what everyone had always believed about Steve: he was extraordinary. From the first day he stepped into campus, he walked with the air of someone who had already been marked by destiny. His parents made sure he had everything he needed, his hostel fees paid in advance, his textbooks bought before lectures even began, and a steady flow of allowance that spared him the usual student struggles. Steve wasn't just another undergraduate, he was a beacon, whose sharp mind and disciplined habits set him apart immediately. While others got carried away with parties, Steve immersed himself in books and lecture notes. His face soon became familiar to lecturers, not for mischief or lateness, but for brilliance. He asked the kind of questions that made even professors pause, recalibrate, and sometimes say, "See me after class, Steve." By his second year, his reputation had already spread across departments. Students whispered about him, "That's the boy who always tops every test." Some hated him out of envy, others admired him, and a few clung to his friendship, hoping a fraction of his light would rub off on them. To Steve, this was normal. He had always been the best, as it was expected. He believed more strongly than ever, that he was walking the straight path to greatness. Every good grade, every award, every applause confirmed it. But there was one thing Steve didn't notice: real life was happening outside the classroom. There is a reasonable space between applied wisdom in real life, and brilliance in the four walls of classroom. While Steve was buried in books, some of his classmates were hustling, selling clothes, shoes, and phones, and facing the real hazardous technicalities and wisdom of life in the field. They ran barbing salons and printing shops on the side. Some, like Kelvin, yes, the same Kelvin who was once dismissed as hopeless, was busy skipping lectures to attend business seminars in town and establishing contacts. Kelvin started with a small trade in fairly used clothes. By his final year, he was already supplying boutiques across the city. With no apologies, his grades in school were poor, as always, and he showed no regrets about it, especially when you consider the fact that his bank account told a different story. Steve, however, saw such things as distractions. He often shook his head at them, thinking, "They'll regret it when results are out." The world only respects the intelligence, and indeed, results always proved him right, at least on paper. By his final year, Steve's name had become a legend on campus. His classmates were certain he would graduate with a first-class degree, and his lecturers spoke of him with pride. The day of convocation came, and it was everything Steve had always dreamed of. The auditorium glittered with decorations, families filled the seats, and cameras flashed like fireworks. When the vice-chancellor mounted the podium and called out the list of the best graduating students, Steve's name resounded above all others: overall best graduating student, Faculty of Sciences, with a record-breaking GPA, Steve Dramani. But this did not surprise Steve, and neither did it surprise his course mates as they watched his received prizes and medals. But in that same audience sat Kelvin. He wasn't there as a student, he had barely managed to graduate with a pass degree. He was there as a guest, driving in with his new car, wearing an expensive suit, and handing out business cards to parents and guests. When Steve saw him, he smirked. Poor Kelvin, he thought. Success will never know his name, at least, that was Steve's thinking, but was he right? What did real life had in stock for both of them, after the success and failures in school? As shocking as it turned out, in ways Steve could not yet imagine, life was about to prove him wrong. The morning after convocation, Steve woke up with his medal hanging proudly on the wall and his certificate lying neatly on his desk. He stared at them with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. To him, those documents were more than just paper and metal, they were keys. Keys that would unlock doors of opportunities, keys that would make the world bow in recognition. For years, Steve had lived with a singular belief: excel in school, and success will chase you. His father had hammered it in him, and his teachers had reinforced it. His community had celebrated it. And now, with his first-class degree in hand, Steve was ready to see that promise fulfilled. After his youth service, he wasted no time. He began applying for jobs with his well-polished CV, carefully listing every achievement: best student in primary school, best student in secondary school, overall best in university. He attached copies of his certificates, believing employers would marvel at his brilliance. He sent out so many applications and registered confidently with different agencies. Months passed and it was silence from everywhere. Finally, one email arrived: "We regret to inform you." Another came: "Though your academic record is impressive, the position has been filled." Steve frowned. He applied again. More applications. More rejections. Some didn't even bother to reply. Maybe it's just the economy, he told himself. Things are slow now, but soon enough, companies will see my worth and start looking for me. But as the months rolled into a year, reality began to pierce through his confidence. Jobs weren't chasing him and success wasn't knocking. His certificates gathered dust in a neat folder, while his bank account dwindled. His parents still supported him, but the tone of their support began to shift as their expectations seemed to be weathering a thick fog. His father would say things like, "So, what's the update? Have you heard anything from any company?" His mother would sigh quietly when expenses piled up. The applause of the convocation hall now felt like a cruel echo, and he kept on reminding himself that this was not the life that he worked so hard in school for. Meanwhile, social media became Steve's torment, as every scroll brought fresh heartbreak. There was Blessing, who had barely graduated with a third class, now flaunting pictures of her travels to Dubai. There was Joseph, who dropped out in his third year, now announcing the opening of his second barbing salon and one restaurant on Victoria Island. And then, there was Kelvin. Kelvin, the once hopeless boy, the backbencher, the joke of every classroom. Kelvin, who couldn't even pronounce photosynthesis correctly in school. Now he was everywhere. His Instagram page was a billboard of success: luxury cars, foreign trips, motivational captions. He was being invited to speak at youth seminars about entrepreneurship. He had even been featured in a magazine as one of the top 30 under 30 young millionaires. Steve couldn't believe it, and he would beat up himself with the thought that life was not fair to him. One evening, he stumbled upon a video of Kelvin addressing a crowd. Dressed in a sharp Italian suit, Kelvin spoke passionately about business, resilience, and the importance of financial intelligence. The crowd cheered, and the comments section overflowed with admiration. "You inspire me. Boss man. Mentor." Steve's hand trembled as he dropped his phone. His eyes fell on his certificates, staring back at him like silent judges. His chest tightened. How can Kelvin be celebrated while I sit here broke? How can the dumbest student of my class now stand as a mentor, while I, Steve Dramani, the golden boy, can't even afford rent? That night, he couldn't sleep as his thoughts ran wild. He had done everything right. He had studied and had excelled, he had obeyed every rule. So why was life punishing him? By the second year after graduation, things worsened. His father retired, and the flow of money at home became slower and fewer. His mother's business slowed down, and Steve was forced to take a teaching job at a small private school, earning just enough to feed himself. The once celebrated school genius was now teaching teenagers who barely listened. Every time a student yawned at his lecture, it felt like life itself mocking him. As he was walking home one evening, exhausted and defeated, Steve asked himself aloud, was intelligence just another overrated trophy? Did they lie to me all along? He had no answers. Only questions. Questions that gnawed at his bones. But life wasn't done teaching Steve, yet. No. This was only the beginning of his education. Sunday mornings had always been Steve's quiet escape. He takes long walks to clear his mind, and it gave him time to think, or more often, to wrestle with the questions that tormented him. On one such morning, weary from another sleepless night, he wandered into a neighborhood hall. A small banner fluttered outside, "Mindset is wealth, unlocking the secrets of success." At first, he scoffed. Another motivational gimmick, he thought to himself, but something pulled him inside, maybe curiosity, maybe desperation. He moved closer to the entrance of the hall, and got himself a cold table water to quench his thirst. The words of the speaker from the sound system was loud and clear at the spot he was standing. "You see," the man began, pacing slowly, "our society has lied to you. They told you, study hard, get good grades, and the world will reward you. But look around. Is that really true?" The crowd murmured. Steve's ears pricked. The speaker continued, "School teaches you how to pass exams, but it does not teach you how to create value. And life rewards value, not grades. Life pays those who solve problems, not those who can recite textbooks." Steve's heart skipped. The words pierced him like arrows. The man went on, his voice rising, "How many of you know someone who was the dullest student in school but is now thriving in business or life?" Steve could imagine hands shot up across the hall, and he was sure that he knew himself to be one. Steve's hand stayed down, but Kelvin's face flashed in his mind. "And how many of you know brilliant students who are struggling, barely surviving?" Again, the audience murmured, and again, Steve's chest tightened. He was the definition of that sentence. The speaker paused, scanning the room. "Let me tell you something important. Success is not about what's in your head, it's about what's in your hands. It's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. Mindset. Risk. Execution. These are the true currencies of wealth." Steve leaned forward unconsciously, drinking in every word. The man began to tell stories, of graduates with first-class degrees working under school dropouts, of entrepreneurs who built empires from nothing but boldness and resilience. He broke down principles of financial literacy, networking, and personal growth. "School conditions you to avoid mistakes," he said. "But in life, mistakes are the teachers that shape greatness. The world belongs to those who dare to make mistakes and grow from it, not those who only prepare." Hearing the story, Steve felt bad and uneasy because he had been contemplating dropping his pride and go to Kelvin for help. He wondered what Kevin will think of him and was thankful that Kelvin was not there to hear that story. By the time the session ended, Steve's mind was on fire. He felt as though a veil had been torn from his eyes. All his life, he had believed brilliance was not just enough, but all it takes and all that is needed. But now, he saw it clearly. Intelligence without application was like a sword kept locked in a box. It might shine, but it would never win a battle. While he was still thinking, there was a loud eruption of applause and appreciation to the speaker. But Steve got his first shocker right then. On the top of the already loud applause, he could hear the words of the host as he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Kelvin Chikwi, of Chistak Global." The applause was deafening, and Steve froze.
But then, who wouldn't froze? The odds were at its peak, against his ego. What would you do? How did Steve make his first 1 million from nothing? What was his turnaround? Do you know the best way to apply brilliance and intelligence? Steve's star got back its shine. Who helped Steve? Find out how in the full story that is coming up next. Please, don't forget to subscribe and share this story. Drop your opinion about this topic and say your mind. I know that this story resonates with you or someone you know. We all can school each other from your comments. Stay blessed.